Hi guys, welcome to today's session.
Brian, it's not live yet.
It is.
Oh, well, it's not on my computer. Sorry, everybody.
It comes up on Zoom before it does on Facebook.
Okay.
Technology hits to start today's 100 in 100 session, guys. Not to worry. Just goes to show how authentic these sessions are. So there you go. Welcome to today's 100 in 100 session. We're getting through them thick and fast. Session number 67 today. Continuing our delve into the funding aspect of the development life cycle. Yesterday's session was the first session on the capital stack, where I discussed equity finance, and today we wanted to discuss another part of the capital stack, being equity.
I think that's what you just said. So you discussed debt yesterday.
Debt yesterday, equity today. Don't know where I am. What a session this one is already. So yeah, debt yesterday, senior debt yesterday, equity today, and probably equity tomorrow again by all accounts. But yeah, I'm joined today by Richard. Not often we get a double session with the two of us, so just wanted to take the opportunity because with regards to raising finance, obviously there's a lot that we've got to cover, and equity is one of the main pieces, obviously, and it will dictate how the rest of the structure of the whole capital stack, 100% of project costs, will come together essentially. So depending on how much equity you have, whether that's your own money, or whether that's working with investor money, or whether it's a combination of both, but essentially the equity is just the cash in that then you leverage debt against. And as times have changed, it's more now focused on minimum equity and maximum debt, when perhaps way back when it was perhaps the other way round. So throwing it over to Richard for his take on equity, and I shall join in as and when.
Actually, just to slightly contradict it, it depends when it was in the past. So going back to, let's think, before you were born, Bryn. So when your sisters were around, early years of your sisters, we could borrow £15 for every pound that we had. Yeah. But the thing was, it didn't have to be anything. It could actually be property. And we were offered at one point, I can't remember what the numbers were, but your granddad and I were looking for some money. We were offered £15 for every pound that we said the house was worth, forgetting about whether it got any debt or not. So at the time, I think we were in the first new build that we did, which you can't remember, but it was worth, say, 125 grand or something like that. I mean, it's going back a long while, but it was worth quite a bit. So we could borrow. If I said, I mean, there wasn't much of a mortgage on it anyway. In fact, there wasn't a mortgage on it. Thinking about it, we didn't have a mortgage. That we could have borrowed, even if we had a mortgage on it, £100,000 mortgage, we could have still borrowed 15 times 100, 125. So just on our house alone, we could have borrowed 1.5 million. And your granddad's house was worth more, so it probably could have borrowed 4 million, just purely based on we said we got some money, and that would have been 100% of all costs.
Ultimate self.
So yeah, it hasn't always been like that. So yeah, just to sort of say it does change, as you've already said. But yeah, I mean, I think that is the thing is we do now, like you said, we look to leverage the equity as much as we can, and that's why some people probably over leverage and get into trouble when there's a bit of a blip, they have cash flow or whatever. But so yeah, there are still people around that all of their project costs are equity. It's just pure cash, and there's nothing wrong with that. People just think that they're leveraging it and they can earn more, but actually, do you know what? It's not a bad thing. So yeah, I think now it seems to be a case of minimum cash in, maximum debt, effectively. And yeah, I think, if we have to be careful doing that. That said, hey, if we can come up with £50,000 in cash, and that can get us into a £3 million deal, then yeah, why not? If it stacks.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, as we said, the how the actual capital stack is put together is it kind of starts almost with the amount of equity that you've effectively got, right? So obviously yesterday talking about senior debt taking first charge in most cases. However, if you've got equity, you've got a lot of equity, you've got deep pockets, or you got investors with deep pockets, you could fund the entire capital stack with equity, as Richard's saying. In which case then you have got security over the project. Ultimately, the more cash you have, or the more cash you've got available, it opens up a lot more doors, and often puts you in front of a lot of your competitors when it comes to acquiring sites. You may not be applying maybe a coupon rate to your equity, so an interest rate to the equity on top of perhaps your profit share, or leveraging against the profit of the project. Therefore, you may be able to pay more for sites if you're sitting on cash. So depending on how much cash you've got may dictate where you go for the rest of the finance, really, because it might be a case of you might fund 50% equity, and then obviously you've got a lot of different options you can go to for the debt side of things, and you can probably pick up some pretty good rates when it comes to that as well.
Yeah, I think it's when you talk about security, is that that's really key, because I'm sure on another video you'll talk about mezz finance, and that generally, as people probably might be aware, it might take second charge, or generally take second charge. Well, actually, if you've got sufficient amount of equity, that can have second charge anyway over whatever it is you're doing. So this is assuming that money's coming in from elsewhere and not our own cash. But security, should be sought by people. However, what I would say, something else you mentioned there, is profit share. Generally, the bigger the reward, the greater the risk. So, and I do find this with investors. Not that we deal with many investors, but we sometimes support investors in looking at stuff, and that is they have to be perfectly frank, an over expectation on what they're going to get. They want charged security, but they also want a massive return. And actually, do you know what? In the real world, that doesn't very often go together. So equity is we can't do anything without cash. And if you haven't got the cash yourself, you're going to get it from somebody else. Our preference always, and when we're talking to people, is do that on a coupon rate, on a fixed rate. And yes, if you want to offer them an extra bonus, if you like, then you can do that. But profit share opens up all sorts of cans of worms, and I guess there'll be a video on that at a later date. So really, it's expectation of your investors, if you're raising equity from other people, be clear on what their expectation is. But they will be looking for security of some sort, whether it's on the project you're doing, or whether it's on other property. And you, as a developer, if you like, raising equity, you've got to be prepared to you got to be prepared to stand up and sort of say, well, okay, obviously if you're taking a greater risk, then I'm going to make sure you get a greater reward. But if you want it wrapped up in security, I can probably go out and get it cheaper elsewhere. Certainly right now, if your deal stacks up, you can go out and get plenty of debt, but it's got to stack up. That's the key.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to working with investors, offering a fixed rate return or a coupon rate, equity sort of normally attracts a sort of a band of interest rate of anything from about 6 to 10%. As a coupon rate, then there might be, as Richard's saying, cherry on the top, in terms of we call it profit share, but it could be an amount of money linked to the profitability of a project. That's generally the best way of structuring something if you don't really want to create real ties with with investors and with other parties, and bringing other people into the mix, because that's one of the other things you've got to consider in terms of other investors. Or if you're working with investors' money, it's, you know, shared financial footprints, and some investors don't want to be part of, you know, part of companies, some do. So it, depending on how you bring the money in, will depend on what security you can offer, and subsequently what returns you can offer as well.
I think, you know, that it covers a whole range here of what could be offered, and depends what you're looking for. There's no real reason that somebody putting, you know, an amount of money in for equity couldn't double their money on the right deal. You know, if that equity is being leveraged, so you're getting some cheaper debt. So overall, it's, you know, the blended cost is reasonable. So yeah, it's not unheard of for somebody to put 100 grand in and get 100 grand out. It's more common to hear people put 100 grand in and not get 100 grand out, not even get their 100 grand back. But that's another story for another day. So, you know, so it depends what the deal is worth to you. You know, so, you know, obviously it has to work for all parties, and whatever the equity is. To say, most people, you'll hear it said, most people run out of their own cash, and that's true. You know, we have cash floating around. It goes in, it goes out, it goes to different projects. It might get lent out, comes back in. You know, and so yeah, you do run out of your own cash, definitely. But people, you know, you know, it's worth people noting that the bigger the deals you do, the less cash you need in. You know, and you know, so, you know, we're doing some at the moment, you know, which is multi-million pounds of funding required, and there'll be very little cash from us going in, but there'll be some skin in the game. I think we have to say that, we have to use that phrase at some point, don't we? Because if you've got investors coming on board, they want to see that you have got some hurt, and it's a people go down the route of, well, it's sweat equity, I'm putting my time in. That doesn't really wash with most people now anymore. It sounds great and all that sort of thing, but you're sort of, well, I'm putting all my time in, etc. But, you know, it has a value, of course it does. I'm not saying it doesn't, but for anybody else coming to the table, if they're clued up, you know, they're not really going to swallow. They'll want something in the game, and it will want to be something substantial. You know, it could be a £5 million project and you've got 10 grand in, but if 10 grand's a lot of hurt to you, that's a cut. You know, and for somebody else, they might want 100,000. So very much you got to take it very much on, you know, each circumstance, I suppose.
Yeah, it certainly challenges the whole doing developments with none of your own money marketing message that is often put out there.
Yeah, tosh, yeah.
Being cynical, I think that the investors that kind of message attracts generally are naive investors, where you're professional, or we would consider professional investors, certainly conscious investors. Certainly want to know that other parties within the process do have some skin in the game. They are going to hurt themselves, you know, if projects do go awry, or the margins aren't on quite as healthy as once thought. So it's always our preference to have some of our own money in all the projects that we work on, and we would advise that if you're looking to build a sustainable development business, that, you know, and build up a good reputation from that point of view, then going along the similar route won't lead you too far wrong. We talk about leverage and leveraging equity against debt. Well, you know, obviously you've got to make a decision as well in respect of, well, how many deals that you've got on the desk at the moment, or how many deals that you may have coming up as well. Because if you've got a certain amount of equity yourself and a pool of investors, or an investor that you're working with, and say that's 100 or 200,000 pounds, the tendency might want to be to stick all of that 200,000 pounds into the first deal that you might have. But obviously, if you're working on a pipeline, it might not be necessary to put 200,000 pounds into the one deal, because you can leverage more debt, basically. So depending on the numbers, obviously. So you may want to look at spreading that equity that you have got, the equity pot that you have got over, and not just the one deal that you're looking at, but perhaps reserving some for the next deal as well, so enable you to move forward on multiple projects and get a bit of traction that way. Because we see a lot of it's probably a good way to go for a new developer, because you're concentrating on one project at a time. Obviously, the advantages of working on multiple projects is you're spreading risk, spreading reward. You're possibly diversifying. You're able to scale perhaps a little bit quicker. But then obviously you've got to juggle multiple projects, and if you're not comfortable with that and you just want to focus on the one, then at least basically what you're working on. But essentially, if you're looking then to grow and to scale, what you don't want to do is use up your cash pot that will inhibit your growth, because obviously we're talking about projects that could last 12, 18, 24, 36 months. So it's about assessing the kind of opportunity cost as well of using up your pot on your first deal, for example. Often a good way, if you are sitting on equity, you've got your own cash, whether that's liquid cash, or whether it's in a business or in a pension, or whatever that may be. And often a good way of leveraging that is popping that into a deal with an experienced developer or another developer, where you can understand the process a bit more. You can put some of it into there, and then obviously you're learning the skills that then you can use the remainder of your cash pot and leverage that on your own deals.
Yeah, I think we can talk about equity and the different ways of using it, for hours really. But the main point about this is that we need cash. You need cash in every deal, and I just sort of confirm what Bryn said about about not having cash in and not using any of your own cash and all that sort of stuff. Yes, it's possible, and it's more possible for people like us that have been around and got a bit of a track record and a bit of credibility. But Bryn's right; he made a really good point about some of the people that go for these sort of deals. They do attract the naive investor, and they're the ones that we've seen going wrong over the last, even in the good times, pre-coronavirus and all that sort of stuff. Those are the businesses we've seen going under, because they attract the naive, the amateur, the very well-meaning and investor, and that's such a shame. Because as I say, for anybody, if anybody offers anybody watching this, here's the deal, and I've got no money in. It isn't just about, which is the point I want to make, because it's happened quite a few times this year. Isn't just about the project going wrong. It's about you getting, if you're the lead developer, you've got no money in, something happens, you just walk away. There is no tie. And that's happened. We've got a few stories, and some of you watching this probably know, a few things that have happened this year of people just walking away, just sort of say, oh well, it's nothing to do with me anymore. Get on with it, and that is a terrible position to for anybody to find themselves in. So as I say, it's not just the project that can go wrong; it's other things that can go wrong. So you really need to make sure that somebody's really tied into it. And which is a shame to an extent, because there are some good projects that people have, they just haven't got the cash. But actually, are they investable? Sort of good friend of mine who's a professional investor. You got to do the due diligence. Isn't just about the numbers; it's about the person and who you're investing in. So they've got to be credible. They've got to be able to deliver, and you've got to have whatever it is you need to to feel comfortable about it. So from an investment point of view, if we're talking to investors, is if it don't feel right, don't do it. And for most people, when you explain it to them, if the developer hasn't got something in there that they are going to lose, even if it's perhaps a charge on their own house, at least that's something, because that's real. But things like personal guarantees and all that, they're not completely worthless. They might make you feel better, but when it comes down to a project going wrong, they tend to be worthless. You know, so from the developer's point of view that's looking to raise equity, obviously they want to get that equity as cheap as possible, and they want to get as much of it as possible generally. So there is less of their own money in. But you know, and I understand that. But from the investor's point of view, they want to get a good return on it and as little risk as possible. Everybody's got different risk appetites. We know plenty of people that put money into deals with no security. You know, and I wouldn't sit here today and say that's wrong, because we've done that much of our life. You know, those people tend to get in deals and do more deals and actually do okay, as long as they're very careful of what deals they do and who they do them with. You know, so you know, on the other side of that, we've got sort of investors that are very, very cautious. They struggle to do deals because they're possibly, can you be too cautious? I don't know, because it comes back down to, if you're not comfortable, don't do it. So I think we're you know, we know a number of investors or would-be investors in you know, in the sort of networking circles, that they just shouldn't be investing because the development business is too risky for them. You know, and they do struggle, and occasionally they get motivated to lend, and they lend, and sometimes they get caught. And you know, our advice pretty much always to them is go find something else to do. This is not the business for you to invest in. Anyway, it's probably shouldn't be talking about that, really, should we? We'll be positive and stuff like that. But you know, equity, we can't do any project without some cash. You know, and I think we're going to do a video on cash flow and how important that is, and that's where equity comes back into it again. So even when you're trying to leverage to the fullest, you know, people really get tight on the cash flow.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. We'll definitely pick that up on a subsequent video. It's not perhaps just the equity on paper that makes up that the 100% of project cost. It's making sure that you've got what we call a float as well, so you're sufficient to actually run the project. So yeah, hopefully you found this useful. Bit of a kind of a different type of 100 and 100 episode for you today, just going a bit back and forth, batting a few things back and forth, because as Richard said, we could talk about equity for and raising equity and how to leverage it and different structures all evening, but hopefully it's steered you in the right way. It's given you some food for thought, whether that's you sitting on equity looking to invest, or whether it's you looking to raise equity or top up your own equity to get involved in some pretty interesting projects. Just make sure that you've considered you know, some of the things that we've discussed. So thanks so much for joining us, whether that be live or whether you're listening to a recording on Facebook, on YouTube, or wherever you're listening or watching this from. And look forward to joining you again for the next 100 and 100 installment 68, where I'll be talking about mezzanine finance. Before we know it, we'll be nearly at the end, and we'd have taken you through the full development life cycle. So thanks very much for joining myself, Brynley, and Richard on today's session, and we look forward to catching up with you again. Thanks very much.